of maybe what functions. Also, it takes a few seconds for it to go really, really live. So once we're at 5 seconds, now we're actually live. And so Meghan, could you say again that thing you were saying about maybe the functions involved? You were saying in live stream, and then we can sort of like, because I think there's two ways about it. I think there is like an NE way that you described. I think there's also an SE way.
That's true. I just was saying that I've noticed that I think this is related to being an NI user, is that in my channel, the way that I like to show my creativity normally is I have ruminated on an idea for a while, and I want to use it, I guess, a video as a tool to be like, this is my idea, like, let me explain like about it. But I've noticed that when I'm live streaming, I kind of will riff off of what other people say, or maybe talk about something that I didn't have planned. And I've noticed that a lot of NPs are the ones that happen to tell me that they like when I live stream and want me to live stream more often, because they see different sides to me that I'm not like planned. So I don't know.
Yeah, you develop a theme. You develop an idea. You take it all the way through, and so people, if they watch it all, they're definitely getting it. It's definitely fully explained. Whereas with me, I might change. I think it's almost like you digress, but it's still within the same idea. Because I think you digress onto examples or anecdotes about that idea, but you still get back on track. Whereas I would digress onto another idea, and then I'll go, but get it back on topic. So my thoughts about the functions of it, I think, yes, if someone's digressing, we can say any, but I've been thinking recently about functions because I was looking at the OP definitions, and I was thinking about how Carl Jung defined it, and I think a lot of these functions, they get, it's almost as if they get the thing that causes it, and they confuse what causes it with everything that follows it. So, for example, if someone has if somebody has a system that works out on a feeling, an initial feeling, they then say, "Oh, the whole of that is FI." No, that's just like the starting point, and then other processes are brought in. You might bring in reasoning, and Carl Jung didn't even put reasoning into either of those categories. He had it as a separate thing. So that means that you could have maybe a separate, because like when he talks about FI and TI, he said that's like the laws of reason, because it's like you could say, because he defined introversion as subjective. Introverted thinking is subjective, and introversion in general is subjective, and extroverted thinking as empirical. He said objective, but he meant empirical. Always going back to the data.
Not TI and FI, neither one is correlated with reasoning. So
it's
unfair that FI isn't reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of see it as a separate process. So I was about to say that, and if you do that, then you can say, oh, if we separate reasoning from TI, then we can say, all right, that means you can have an ESFP smarter than an INTP.
Yeah, that's true.
Because
or go ahead.
So it's just that what people don't seem to think about is functions that sort of use other things, and then people include those other things in the function. So for example, TI tends to use a lot of reasoning because it's just speculation, and it's sort of reasoning it through to see how it plays out. Whereas, but that doesn't mean that reasoning is TI.
And whenever I hear people sort of describe inferior TI and an ENFJ as being like bad at reasoning, or sometimes people will sort of convey either for polar FI and like EFP types or EFJs with inferior, that sometimes I hear like that we are wrong often, or that we are, bad at reasoning. And I just think I do it in a different way.
Yeah.
But for just kind of a good example is, of my inferior TI, I guess, is that I was taking a data analysis class and I had to use R. This is this programming language, and I'm slow at grasping that. I wasn't making any incorrect reasoning, but for example, every little piece of the process needed to be spelled out for me. I noticed it's kind of hard to describe like what it was if you aren't familiar, but it's very, I could tell like my professor was like an ENTP and like would explain some bits, and then there were like pieces missing I didn't get because I didn't think it through myself. And then once I did figure it out myself, I sort of was like, oh, okay, his stronger TI assumed that I would have assumed that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just can sense how it's faster at grasping it. I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry.
See, a lot of times, this is a thing with NPs and definitely with NTPs, is that we rely on NE so much to understand something. So if we're taught a new thing, because I was like this in university, like I would fall behind once but when it was like a new concept, I was able to understand it quickly if it was like something I already understood. And if you could say, oh, that's just like that, and therefore you understand the new thing in terms of the old thing, then the problem is
don't do that very well at all.
But the problem is though that you're understanding a new thing in terms of the old thing. That means you're filtering stuff out. So that's not necessarily good when the new thing's got nuances to it in itself. So it's like when I'm looking at objective personality, I'm looking at it completely from the Jungian point of view and going, well, that doesn't fit. Are you sure that TE is always tribe? What about ENTJ? So it's like I've got this problem of trying to understand this thing through the lens of what I already know, and I keep running up with, well, that doesn't seem to be defined right. Why are they saying FI is values? It's like it doesn't, and it's like, and then I'll also say something like, but what about CBT? You've got thinking. I would think all of your definitions have to not contradict proper psychology or proper cognitive psychology. So
maybe a better way to describe it is that it's almost like I'm slower at grasping what is the logic that the other person is using.
Oh my god, I'd put someone on screen, but I don't think you'd like the name. Their username.
Oh, whatever.
Can you see it? Is in the side? Oh, is there something at the side where it says comments?
Oh no, I see it now. I was clicked on private chat.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you know. So doing it like this, you get to experience what it's like for the guest. Now let me show you what it's like for the host with all the extra functionality. Now there's going to be a little bit of an infinite regression, but at least around the edges, you'll be able to see that you got the little boxes and you got all these different options for how you want something to be.
Is this going to your YouTube?
Yeah, this is going, and it goes straight to the YouTube if you log in with your. Now I tried it with Facebook a month or so ago. Well, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and it went a little bit weird. But
yeah, I synced up my Facebook too, and I'm going to see how that works.
Yeah, it might work better for you. So because I use Linux, I shouldn't have said that because now people try and hack me. Oh, damn it! Right. So things I call that narcissist mode. All right. So and then there's one that's I never use those, but I like this one.
Mm-hmm.
Where you can have it like this, where you see more of the background, but you get this nice close-up feature, and you could do that with 6 squares on screen.
If you were to do the background thing, would you be able to insert your own background? Because, wait, or is it always black in the background? I wonder.
Yeah, you can't do fancy stuff like green screen. But Carol did that once.
Well, the reason why I asked is because I tried out the basic plan just because it said unlimited streams and like I could put my logo on there and stuff, and so I didn't know if it would let me do that, but I can play around with it. I guess I didn't think I could play around with it because I thought that I would have to go live, but it seems like there's some things I can do like before like actually hitting the live button.
So I'm just going to have a request to the audience. So we have 5 viewers at the moment. Can anyone that's not got a vulgar name type something in the live stream chat?
Or you can copy what the vulgar, what they said as your own original question, because I see it and it's a good question.
Yeah. But so yeah. Anyway, so I'll just read it. Anyway, I'll put it on screen. Here we go. We're gonna have to brace yourselves with some vulgarity. Right. So again, this is what's great for you if you were to do a Q&A. What we got here?
I like being able to click on each one at a time.
Yeah.
So sometimes whenever I don't click on them and it's just through YouTube, I feel like people are like, "Oh, you didn't see my question," or like, "Oh, are you going to go back to it?" sort of thing, and I can like show what I'm talking about. Okay.
And I'm glad it shows up when it's a super chat, because you're well over 1,000 subscribers, so you could get people asking $5 questions. Peter Schiff once got one. I don't know why he's accepting it. He's a multimillionaire and somebody gives him a $100 question. And he says, I better give a $100 answer. Right, so... I never got round to saying what I thought the SE version of...
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's another thing I like with the functions, is have your functions be Kersey temperament compatible. And that's what you get with a lot of the Dario definitions. So I would say that a feature of SE is the ability to improvise. And so I would think maybe ESFP would stay with a certain strand and play it through. But they're not going to be doing the tangenting thing. And I suppose maybe a way to see that would be to say, watch people on an improv night and sort of maybe see a difference between how the NPs do it and the SPs do it.
I used to do improv in college, and I noticed that SPs were kind of good at going along with what the other person did and like adding to it and like going on. But then like NPs would throw a random idea that is like out of left field that then would make it like an interesting random thing.
So yeah, you could imagine that. So if there was like a theme, the SPs would be better because it's like variations on the theme.
Yeah.
And if you've got a load of MPs, bye theme.
Whenever I did improv, I liked whenever I had a prompt, and I liked whenever I felt close to the person that I was with, because I would feel like we can riff off of each other. But it's funny, I actually remember an INTP that I did improv with once, where it was very difficult at first to get along, to do the improv, because I felt like I couldn't tell where he was going, or like I was like, why aren't you going along with what I'm trying to do? He just had a mind of his own.
There's a bit in the I am getting back onto, but I have to do this digression to actually show that I'm going back on it, which is a bit weird. So there's a bit in the Kersey personology, which is his most INTP book. And it's like, if you look at personality, I don't know if you've got personology.
Huh?
Have you got Kersey's final book, personology?
No, I don't.
It's proper INTP. Like everything is. I mean, I've made it even more INTP, but marking it all up. But he's got his like everything's like it's like, oh, this is the full Kersey, and because it is the full Kersey, it's a little bit it's.
Oh, I definitely want to get that then.
It's not an easy read if you're just dipping in and out, but if you read it in order, then it'll be so. Anyway, the reason why I brought this up is that he was writing about NT speech being factorial, analytic, and deductive, and with the factorial part, you might think initially, what does factorial mean? And so I was looking at it, and I got about halfway through it before, oh, that's what it means. It's basically, I think what I do is, unless I'm being self-indulgent, then I'll digress onto something that I'm interested in and want to talk about. But most of the time, if it's a typology hangout, I'll digress onto something. Here we go. There we go. There's an example of a Pum 2 half Kersey. What? What's Pum 2? The other. What?
Oh, please understand me too.
The half Kersey. Oh, yes, the half Kersey. Yeah, sorry. I because I was doing that. I can only do one thing at a time. Yeah, the full Kersey. Because what happened was this guy, who is the son-in-law of David West Kersey, he was the editor on the book. And so Stephen Montgomery, this is a good book for showing people who are getting new to typology and I don't want to read all of Please Understand Me Too. It's like a simpler way for them to understand. And it might actually be good for older people because like the movie references might be a bit older.
I'm just like seeing a big dissonance lately between like things that are easy for people to understand and then things that are like really complex and get really at the crux of things. And it's like, I don't know, like sometimes like if you want anything to be easier to understand to new people, you're gonna not be able to talk about every little detail of a personality at first. And so it doesn't mean that there aren't other nuances, but it's like, I don't know. There are people that seem to prefer to make it easy to understand, and there are people that are like really, really dense in how they describe things. It's like, how do you, I guess, meet in the middle, or like, how can you make it easy to understand, but also like just as dense as like psychological types? You know, like I've been thinking about that lately.
So Dario has been teaching a long time, and he knows how to set something out. And you've recently got this book.
And do you think he does a good job at sort of being in the middle of that?
And I think you've got this one as well.
Yes.
And in both of these books, I think he does the sneak peek thing. So it's almost like he gives an introduction and then like a sneak peek.
I just was going to say that I recently got this one.
Right.
And I was very impressed with the sort of disclaimer section at the beginning.
Yeah.
And it was like, what understanding personality, like what is personality type? And I really like how these little bubbles of like people asking questions are like the same questions you get all the time of like, wait, so you mean that I'm the same as everyone else? Like, you know, that sort of thing. That I like how they kind of anticipated like the questions that people were going to ask like at the beginning, so that like it can, I don't know, leave you with an open mind when you get into it.
Yeah, they incorporate a lot of feedback through their classes. So there was a bit. So what I was sort of thinking is, in terms of explaining, is I noticed that Dario, and of course he does a sneak peek of his favorite function, extroverted sensing. He really loves extroverted sensing. I mean, it's like that. That's another thing in OP where it talks about, oh, if you're NI Dom, then your demon is SE, and the function you have least respect for. Dario has loads of respect for SE, so I'm wondering, are they? I don't know a lot about OP. Are they thinking like this? initially you have no respect for it, but then you get the hots for it.
That's kind of it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard, and I haven't watched everything they've done, but I don't think I heard that you don't have respect for it, because there's also a thing that they talk about called like peacocking, where like you think you're really, really good at your like inferior, which I relate to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But really, I think the thing I get from it is, like, for example, as an ENFJ, maybe I'm really concerned about FE things. It's sort of telling me, like, hey, you don't need to be so concerned with that. You should be a little bit more concerned with the TI piece. Like, it's sort of telling you to move in that direction, which, depending on where you are in your growth, it might be hard for you.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Also, one of the things that people don't do when they talk about functions is that the way typology is taught, it's taught as a static model. It's
I hate
this
that.
is dominant, this is auxiliary, this is tertiary, but Carl Jung all the while was going on about development. It's just inferior in comparison to the dominant, and then, but if you're suggestive for it, and you've got enough time, and you can get your inferior function in pill form the way you can, because you can just pick up a book and go, "Ooh, TI." I can't pick up and go, "Ooh, FE."
But you can send someone a StreamYard link and then talk to them.
Yeah, but that's not. It's not. I mean, come on, Meg. I mean, you can easily get, like, on a device. You can read a little thing. Especially for an INTP. I need people on tap. That's the right person.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in order for an INTP resembler to get their FE on, first of all, their FE is very conditional in that it has to be the person that they want to speak to, and there might not be many of them, and they've got to wait for that person to be available. Versus if it's you, and your TI might be conditional in that you're not interested in everything that's TI. It's maybe those things that are in tandem use with your dominant function. So typology as a TI system is in tandem use with your FE. And
I've even said before, like, I will only get A's on a class, or I'll only, like, be really good at a job if I care about it, or if I'm respected. You know, like, I eventually would have to trick myself, like, in school, like, to really think about, like, okay, you have to get good grades whether you care about this or not, because of the end goal, which then I'll care about. But, like, it's very hard for me to be, like, sharp intellectually and, like, with it if I don't care. Like,
and there's another thing in typology that people don't appreciate, and that is the functions are not equally used. So I would, if we
or by individuals.
I'll give an example. I think an SE DOM uses SE more than an NE DOM uses NE.
I can see that, and that kind of brings me to what I was going to say earlier, is that I think in a way feelers have an advantage in the sense that we have to go to school. Like, we have to go to school. You don't have to have friends. You know, you don't have to. No one's making you. And, like, and so I tend to see thinkers really, like, excel at school, excel in their careers, and then sort of realize later in life, wait a minute, I'm, not in the relationship I want to be in, or, like, maybe I haven't gotten married, or maybe I don't like my friends that much, or I don't know how to stay in touch. Where, like, feelers will just do that. Not that feelers are always going to be really good at that, but chances are that's, like, what you're already thinking about. Where, like, for me, like, when it comes to my career, even though I believe I have a 3-wing, it's very much like I'm doing this so that I can, like, make money, so that I can love on the people I like, so that I can be with my family and friends and loved ones. Like,
so, does your 3-wing have to still be? And this might sound like a dumb question. And it's like, of course, Ben. How dare you? How dare you think it isn't the case? Does your E3 have to fit within the rest of your NF values?
Yeah, it does. It really does.
So it's not selling your soul for success.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It has to be congruent with the full Meghan
It really does.
idealist system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think thinkers have an advantage in a lot of ways, but that's just one that I've thought of, is that, you know, feelers can complain all they want about how like society doesn't care about their feelings, but who, like, no, okay, no offense to thinkers, I don't know how else to word this, so correct me if I'm like whatever, but at the end of the day, who's like, are you happy?
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I've reached that conclusion.
Yeah.
So now I can do something with share screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the wrong. That was share screen the wrong thing, but now I can share screen the right thing. So this would actually be a good event for you to join, because I was going to do something. I got in a mood about I call them the socionic supremacists or the socionic segregationists.
Oh my God.
And I was getting annoyed by definitions of the functions that are based on premises, and I was like, and it's like they should know the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument. So, for example, you know socionics, you know how they define their functions. They're internally consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think, oh, because they're internally consistent, in fact, they're insistent that they're internally consistent. Because they're internally consistent, they believe they're true. But there's a difference between logically valid and sound. So,
T.I. gone crazy.
So I had so this is one of these things, you know, I was saying before about T.I. uses reason but is not reason. And so we then play it out to then see how true the premises were, because INTP loves to think about new premises and do stuff like this and critique other people's definitions. And even when they follow somebody else's stuff, they can't help but changing it. Like Van der Hoop changed his thoughts and disagreed with Jung, even though he was taught by Jung. And then Jung was taught by Freud. It's like we can't help but we're always going to change it to what we think it should be. And there's your subjective factor. So again, someone can have a sound argument only if the premises are true. But in typology, they're not 100% true. It's how near can you get to it. Oh, this can be a thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Say you have a model, and all of the factors within that model are consistent, and you would think, oh, this is brilliant. This is internally consistent, and this is true. But then, say if you know about Enneagram, then you go, but if they're this Enneagram type, that's not true, because that factor has not been taken into account in the model.
Yeah. So this actually reminds me of what you were saying earlier about how Jung didn't say that TI was reasoning, even though it uses reasoning or whatever, because whenever I've taken like, I guess logic classes, I had to take a couple classes like that in college. I feel like I'm just instinctively good at knowing if something is, I guess, a valid argument or not.
Yeah.
I might be wrong. I'm sure I'm wrong sometimes. Everybody is. But like, I think I probably like do that same process from maybe a more emotional lens than someone else. But I still care about making sure that everything I'm saying is like a valid.
Yes. So that's like getting to the same result through different reasons. So it's like you're thinking about the other person. It's like, for this other person, I want to make it right in order to get the right impression.
And I think some people can like make it seem like an FE Dom cannot understand that, you know, like simple things like double standards or false equivalence, like things like that. Like, that's not just something that a thinker can understand. Like, I have a brain. Like, it really annoys me when there are certain things like that.
So, is to make a comparison then. So, because you care what the other person thinks, you're going to put the effort in to get it right. So
I
you could have
I could tell the impact emotionally of saying something wrong, you know?
right, and then you're able to calibrate off that and adjust and follow up based on the feedback. So if we then do the other one, say ISTP, so lead TI, super, right? And the way certain typologies would look at it, it's like, oh, they've got 4D TI. That means they're objective and never wrong. No, that's not right. They're putting too many things together. That is the problem. If you put logic in the same bucket as TI, then you're saying that TI DOMs can never be wrong because they've got objective logic. No, that's not right. It just aspires to that.
I've witnessed TI DOMs just like blatantly lie all the time, like to me, like in my past experience. And maybe I would say that some of them that are not so great are able to lie because they are aware of what the consistency is and like they can manage that. I don't really know, but like I definitely know that there are people who are not true, or that what they're saying is not true. Like I don't know.
There's also temperament coming in where they like the risk. Oh, will they get found out? Can I keep this lie straight?
Yeah.
Can I? And a part of them might even be to have an inconsistency in the lie, but they think they can TI it in the moment and adapt to it.
But then a feeler might lie because they think that if they were to say the truth, it would hurt someone. So it's like everyone could lie, whatever.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
And if the feeler gets unhealthy, I don't know if have you done a video on, this is a little bit of a cheeky question, Megan, but say the spectrum of mental health of ENFJs.
I actually have. I can send it to you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we have sort of two type images of them, and one of them is like the cult leader, and then the other one is like the Kersey version of ENFJ because he was married to one, where it's like this super nice person that's also a leader, and it's like, because I have this theory that I've extended it now to FE, but about a year ago, or less than a year ago, I was thinking, wow, FI usage really does depend on mental health. Because I remember Carl Jung writing about FI, and he wrote about if it's egocentric, then you can't do the empathy thing. So I thought, oh, right, so FI is related to mental health. And in about the last month or so, I thought, well, that's the same for FE as well. Because you can have, say, these FE DOMs, people who type as ENFJ, who don't necessarily care about people, but they are good with the emotions thing.
Yeah. And also, it's like a lot of the issues with ENFJs are, even if we want to help or we can like pretend like we want to help, like, do we execute on what we say that we're going to do? Like, and so the healthier an ENFJ is, the better they're going to actually be at helping you. Where then there's also going to be the less emotionally mature ENFJ that might like say they want to do something, but then they don't actually follow through or execute in the way that they said, or like something gets, I don't know.
Where do you think, because an interesting thing from learning the Berens, I call them the Kersey Berens interaction styles because like she developed it based on Kersey dichotomies. He didn't actually have a name for them, but it was definitely in there. So what I was thinking, what's interesting is the NFJs are the only directive feeling types. So they're directing people for their own good. So
yeah. That's
so
so funny. I noticed the difference between ESFJ and ENFJ, but I never made that connection. But
what I'm thinking though is it's easier for ENFJ to go down sort of the bad slope. If that particular thing though of for somebody's own good, the way they can develop, that's a power that can be corrupted. And so what is that like for you when I mean, this is not going to be a question I'm going to ask on Friday, but it's an interesting question for now. And then we'll get back to this. An interesting question for you. How do you balance out the need to respect somebody else's feelings with this vision, this strategic, diplomatic vision of how you feel the other person needs to be.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good question. I do think that, you know, it is very powerful. It's very emotionally powerful, where maybe the other directed types, you know, they don't have that sort of emotional sway on people. So I would just say, like, with great power comes great responsibility, sort of thing. Where, okay, sorry, I'm kind of going around on this question, but I also, for example, I am afraid to enter a room if I'm in a bad mood, because I'm aware of the way that my bad mood will affect the room. So that's like just like one thing. But gosh, what was your question again? Oh, and also, you know how people say that who you are is the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Have you heard that?
That might vary based on type.
It definitely varies based on type, but I do think that there is an influence there, whether you value FE or not. But that's probably even more true for an FE Dom. So, but I guess, or go ahead.
Just a little bit of a scientific approach coming in here. So, if we would have to do an experiment where we are comparing somebody who's 5 people around them they've sort of chosen versus 5 people at random, because those 5 people around them, they're going to have an effect on them, but there's a reason why those people are around them in the first place. So they
exactly.
But we all do know, though, there are some people, like, he's all right when you say about them, he's all right on his own, but when he's around his friends.
Yeah,
it brings out that side in them. So that can be true as well. And
I'm sending you an article about it, but
okay, if you send it over Facebook, because this can sort of disappear afterwards. I'll say something that was in a writing book that's actually interesting. That's relevant to this. I bring this up frequently. So,
but also remember, I want to answer that question.
Right, I'll have to write it down. With the question was about the directive. Okay, I'm going to write it in the side. I'm going to delegate. Somebody in the chat, please write down the question about that I asked Meghan about abusing the power of directing people for their own good and manipulating them, and when to know that it's for their own good and when to pretend it's for their own good. And now I've forgotten that thing that I was going to digress onto.
Sorry. If we do a video again, like for Friday, I'm going to take notes, because I've noticed that with NPs, like if I don't like take notes of like what I was going to say earlier, then I'm going to just forget it.
Oh, I'm going to be super on track on Friday, because there's specific questions that Victor has me ask, and the way I follow up, and I don't want to overload your software when it tries to transcribe it, especially if Jonathan talks and it's got to cope with his accent. You might have to ask Jonathan to come in for a session to like calibrate his voice.
Oh my gosh. Well, say what you were going to say, and then I want to finish.
I can't remember what I was going to say. I'll have to try and work. Oh, yes, that's it. Yes. Okay. Cast design. So, have you seen The Godfather?
Oh my gosh, no.
Have you seen The Sopranos?
Yeah.
Right, you've seen The Sopranos. Right. So, the idea is there's something about cast design where, so, say you've got Tony Soprano. Oh, I've got a question for you. Does he behave differently depending on the person he's interacting with? Is he different to his wife than he is from...
I'm sure, yeah.
Right, so you can see there that brings out different sides to a character.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so if you're designing a story, and so Robert McKee would talk about, well, if you've got your protagonist, you want to design your cast around that protagonist to show different sides to them. And so you could have like a villain character, but that show them being nice to, say, their child or their spouse, something like that, or taking pity on somebody to show these different sides to the person. And that made me think of the person with the 5 friends around them. and then other person can bring out that side
Mm-hmm.
in them. And a lot of spouses will say about their spouse that their spouse has that one friend.
Mm-hmm.
When my spouse, if they behaved like that all the world, I wouldn't be with them. The one that's a bad influence.
And I guess I would say that some people are more influenced than others, but even if you aren't very consciously influenced, the people around you do like make an impact on you, and if they're a part of your bubble, like you're at least choosing to some extent to be around them. Like, so it can either reflect on you or it can influence you. It doesn't really matter, but I guess I was just gonna say, you know, it just was a partial talking point to the rest of the point. You don't need to TI the whole thing.
Actually, I was in because I was thinking about FI DOMs choosing the people around them.
Mm-mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting thing from Kersey, and it's also in socionics a little bit, and that is that INFP is both very individual but also collectivist.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a weird kind of TI. And thinking about differences between, say, ISFP and INFP.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's true.
And how, because I got pushback from Imogen and Shannon when I suggested that the ethics of ISFP was situational. But it is different from INFP.
Yeah.
There's an emphasis, there's a difference in, I think Imogen was saying that, because somebody asked her, I think she said that an INFP friend asked her, oh, you support this thing, why don't you go on this march with us? And it was almost like she said that she didn't want to impose her values on other people because she saw freedom as the most important value. But Imogen is like a 9. So I don't know, that would have to be proper studies on that between ISFPs and INFPs, because I have a theory that the NE, and what I should do in future from now on is not be glib by saying that NE is transcontextual thinking. I should not say that. I should say it's the genesis of transcontextual thinking, because as soon as you start thinking, it's thinking and not an irrational function. Because it might be you get that flash of connection.
Oh yeah.
And then when you start thinking, that's not any anymore. Oh, that's any with reasoning.
Yep, that's true.
So
yeah. So just, I guess, to answer your question is like, okay.
I forgot.
No, but okay. So people say that you're the sum of the people you're around, whatever. Whenever I was a lot younger, I was a lot more easily influenced, perhaps, but also for me, especially as a 2 as well, whenever I start to feel a dissonance between me and the people that I'm around, I feel pretty uncomfortable. And so I kind of went through this period where I started to specifically follow people, like either on social media or watch them or listen to their podcasts or whatever, that I saw myself in, I wanted to emulate more one day, whether that would be like they seem to have a lot more faith than me, or they seem to be just a lot more comfortable with themselves, or anything, like confident, whatever I saw. And I would intentionally surround myself with that influence so that I could then grow into that. And so I guess when it comes to using your power for good, if I am peaceful, then that's going to be a lot better of an influence as an FE Dom, because when you're around me, you're going to feel peace. If I'm stressed or anxious, when you're around me, you're going to tell that I'm stressed. And so for me to surround myself with people that were, I guess, a better influence, and I had to intentionally do that, because you could argue that there's lots of things that are, I guess, wrong with the way that we're socialized, depending on where you are, whatever. There's a lot of either people come from families that are, have issues. Everyone's family has issues. Everyone has their trauma of whatever you want to call it. Everyone's working through their own emotions and trying to be a little less toxic, or whatever you want to call it. But I guess my point is that, I had to make an effort to, I guess, be the best person that I can be. But before I did that, I had to realize that I impacted people around me. So if an ENFJ is just thinking like, oh, nobody cares about me, nobody's even paying attention to me, then they can just sort of walk in like a steamroller and just like, I don't know, annoy everyone, or just like, I don't know, like, there's definitely been time, like, whenever I was younger and I would get in fights with my mom, I would always slam the door, or I would, like, obnoxiously sit something down. Like, my aura would just be, like, mad, or, like, I don't know. And, like, if I don't know how to handle those emotions or process them, then they can cause, like, conflict. Or if I don't know how to if I don't know how to process my emotions on my own, then maybe I would turn to like gossiping about it, or like triangulating people by like saying, oh, so-and-so said this. Yeah. Heather Bryant says ESFJs do that too. That's very true. It's like, I think realizing that the impact that our FE has, and then ENFJs, when they grow, need to learn how to use that or direct that toward, like, I guess if you don't realize that you're impacting people, then you're going to accidentally do things that are not so great. But if you own that, then you can make better decisions.
So I made some notes. And one of them was that this might sort of my thought process. I was drifting off a little bit, and then when you said later on, you said, my point is that, and I thought, is that a brilliant bit of FE from Meghan, where she can tell if when she's interacting with an MP that they slightly digress into their own thought, and then if you say, well, my point is that, it sort of gets them back on track.
Yeah, that is.
So you do that consciously, right?
Yeah. That's funny, yeah. Well, because I realized that I didn't know how to TI define what I was referring to, and so I was throwing out a lot of FE sort of categories to sort of paint a picture for you. Yeah.
So the difference, Ben, is I might do that. So this is the difference in focus of attention. You're going to be focusing more on how it lands on the other person.
Yeah.
And then you're aware of, so your motivation of saying, my point is that, is to help the person get back onto it. Whereas with me, would be digressing, and then I would just say, my point is that, in order to then get back onto the main point, because I'm thinking about the focus is not so much on the other person, but it's trying to explain it. So you see the difference there, with like just the difference in emphasis between the idea itself and then the person, and then how the person reacts to the idea. Just that little difference in emphasis.
Absolutely. And what's really funny is whenever I talk to INFJs, if I was saying this exact same thing to an INFJ, they probably would have cut me off before I even finished my point. They would have said, oh, yeah. And like that's what happens sometimes, where I don't even finish the point, or I don't articulate the TI. And they just get my train of thought, and then they're like, uh-huh. And then so if someone was eavesdropping onto me and an INFJ, they might not know what we're even talking about.
I think you mentioned this person, Heather Bryant.
Yeah. I was just sort of saying, yes, I agree with that.
Or maybe that was an FE thing where you actually saw her in there long ago. Oh no, the time scale wasn't right. I thought, I'll work her into the conversation. No. Something else about functions in live streams, and this might be. I'll say what it's like for me, and then I'll see what it's like for you. So usually, if I'm explaining something to somebody else, and as that happens, I actually think of new stuff. Like there's like new ways of putting it, and that happened once when I was doing an event with Crystal, INFJ Resembler, Enneagram 2 Resembler, went by Lady Lullaby on YouTube. So you probably know who she is. I was being very careful there not to mention her surname. And we did this thing on the creative use of FI in INFJ, NI effects, and we were speculating about, and we got into how INFJ and INFP might counsel differently. And I sort of came to the conclusion that maybe INFP might see the pattern quicker, but INFJ would be better at then knowing then what to do with that from that.
Oh, yeah.
Like once they've solved, they might solve the problem later, or might even sooner, but die a different process. But the actual advice, because directive, it's like, well, if you do this, or this, or they won't even do it like that. They'll just ask the right question for the person to come to their own realization. I don't know if you do stuff like that. That could be a tricky way without being directly directive, where you ask the person the right questions to get them in the right frame of mind to come up with the answer by themselves. Or do you do stuff like, oh, that's a great idea of yours, when it's an idea that you planted and then you say it was their idea? If you know it's the sort of person, ISTP, that won't take anybody else's advice and has to think that it's their own idea.
I don't think I intentionally plant ideas like that, but it's funny. Actually, my ENTJ uncle told me that I should do that. So I don't know what that is connected to, but I was like complaining about work or something, and my ENTJ uncle was telling me the way to get a boss to like you, if you have an idea and you think it's unpopular or you don't know if it'll go by, just ask a question, then they'll say something, and then make it seem like they inspired your idea or that it was their idea, and then they'll like you, and then they'll think, oh, and I don't really do that. Like, yeah,
that's got to be executed very well, because that can really come off bad, and if you get caught at it, not good. So that's the kind of advice you get in NLP, that the NTJs and NTP and INTP would just mess up, like trying to use a technique, and it just comes across as so fake, and it's like you're trying to be manipulative, and it's like,
that's the thing. I don't use any techniques, but then some things that I do might remind people of techniques they've or something.
Yeah, for the NTs, it's like, oh, a technical approximation of this natural thing. So I can get back to this thing, because I would like your opinion on this, because this is something from I think you call him Papa Young.
Also, I probably should go in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Oh, you just want me to read it and tell you my opinion? Or
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, the one-sidedness lies in the premise. That is so important, because subjective logic doesn't mean that it's more likely to be like super biased, in my opinion. It's just that if you accept the premise, then if you as a TI user say something, and it's very logically thought out, I might disagree with one of your premises, which would mean I disagree, even though what you're saying is like super logical. I just might have a different premise or whatever. But people that buy into your premise, then that's going to really fit. Where I'm not quite sure how TE would relate, or like if TE uses premises. But like, for example, actually, a common thing that I get into with TPs, I guess little arguments online, is that they will accuse me of being illogical because I disagree with their premise. And I refuse to argue because I know that it's pointless, because I know that the underlying premise of their argument is subjective and that I'm allowed to have my own.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, one thing you can do with them is you can think, okay, if you've got counter examples to hand, you can blow them out of the water. If you've got at least 3 counter examples, they're dead.
See, that's the thing that I don't think of doing. But maybe what I should start doing is point out the premise that I disagree with, because I don't even really tend to do that either.
Or say that their premise is rhetorical and that it's something that's true for the most part rather than something that's necessary. So, for example, I read a book on. I read Aristotle's rhetoric, and I read about book 8 of topics, and basically, what he wanted is if you again very Aristotle very NTP. So if you frame some rhetoric in the same way as a syllogism, so it's like from two premises, then the third thing is definitely true if the first two things are true. But it's like it has that structure, but the things that the premises are not necessarily true. So for example, you can build a premise like this: all people are created equal. Is that necessarily true? It's something that a lot of people want to believe is true. So that would be an example of a rhetorical premise. If you say all people are created equal.
So even just like, for example, I'm sure a lot of NFJs would relate to me in regards to how I use TI, but I am a very spiritual person, and a lot of my core beliefs are things that cannot be proven or disproven.
Right.
So a lot of times I won't get into arguments because I don't really think it's a good use of my time. Depends on what it is. I can't think of a good example right now, but like if I like believe in like a spiritual principle as like a fundamental premise of all of my arguments, then how can I argue that? You know.
So that's a slight interruption by me, Megan, but you might appreciate this. So, what out of 10 do you give this level of trolling? I'll give this 1 out of 10. I'm sorry, Hatchback.
Would 10 be the person who succeeded in trolling?
Yeah, you succeeded in trolling where we didn't know it was a troll, and where
it was definitely 1. But if you were saying what out of 10 am I sure that is a troll, I would say 10.
Yeah. So yeah, I apologize, Hatchback, if you were not trolling. Yeah. Anyway, so
if you weren't trolling, I would recommend looking into like the sort of logical framework so that you can improve.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to troll somebody, I mean, there's part of me that would think. I mean, there'd be some people who would think that Model A is a big troll. Because seriously, because like anyway, I'm not going to get into that because I'll mention this a little bit. I want to do a thing in future. Anyway, so Megan. Oh, I was going to mention Meta TI. Meta TI knows the limits of reason. So you get people like Kant. I'll put him in Meta TI category.
What do you mean by TI?
Meta TI. So, for instance, Immanuel Kant wrote a book called A Critique of Pure Reason. And so it's like, that's almost like a critique of pure TI. It's where it's those people who use TI who think that because it's logical, it's 100% true. And it's like, it's got to be a critique of pure reason, that it can only go so far. So it's beyond, it's meta, it's beyond TI, and we're aware of the limits. So I'm going to name a few people on this channel who I believe have Meta TI. Dario Nardi, even though INTJ, because he did systems theory and he was around a lot of INTPs, and so he knows the limits of definitions and things like that, and can sort of step back from it and not get trapped in the logic. I think Mitchell's got Meta TI. I think Amanda's got Meta TI. It's usually these people who have read philosophy and know the limits. So people who read, say, Kant or Wittgenstein, and they just get to a point where it's like, oh, I wish I'd never bothered with this. Because it's like...
Yeah. I'm getting that. Yeah.
So, tongue-in-cheek, here we go. Yeah, I mean, I was only having a laugh, Hatchback. Right, but it could also be given a benefit of the doubt. Okay. Right. Yeah, I know I've got to wind up. But, so, one thing I was thinking we could do in the future. Me, you, and Jonathan.
Let me say one thing really quick, though, to what you said earlier. Is I think as an NF, maybe this is a temperament thing, I'm interested in the topics that transcend logic. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about things that cannot be proven or disproven. And so it can make a lot of the things that I say seem as though I didn't think them through or something. Like, I mean, I'm interested in astrology, for example. Like, that's not something I can argue, you know?
Astrology might be one of these things where my opinion, what I get from my opinion is that the basis doesn't seem scientific, but the way it's all worked out with all the nitty-gritty details, it might be approximating to something that's useful, because those intermediate ideas that get to a point that could be useful. I've forgotten what I was going to say. Oh yeah, so what I was thinking was this. So I don't like the idea of like thinking being opposite to feeling. I'm like, it's apples and oranges. They're not direct opposites, because many times, and you'll understand this because this will be very important to you, to have your thinking and your feeling in congruence. They're working together. And so this being this is the model of, this is how CBT sees thinking and feeling working together. This makes more sense to me than to say thinking is the opposite of feeling.
Actually, this actually reminds me, I actually, in my brain, would say that my thoughts influence my emotions.
Yeah.
The opposite way, where for my, like, I would put emotions like in front of my head like that, and then my thoughts influencing it, because I have a lot of thoughts in the subconscious that are just like self-doubt or like limiting beliefs or like premises that are just, I don't know that I think, but they're influencing how I feel. I'm not super into CBT, but I've wondered about this before, because I've heard people say emotions influence thoughts, and that, you know, you should uncover what your emotions are so that you can have purer thoughts. And I don't know what I think about it, but I've wondered, like, could that be backwards? You know,
it goes both ways, and
I also can see the other argument that like thoughts could be the cognition that includes, you know, FETI, like all of them.
Well, I think it depends on. So this is where people will talk about, like in certain profiles will talk about, say, oh, INFP has got sucky TI. I'm like, hang on a minute. I know an INFP that studied philosophy, and if you put reason in the TI bucket, then you're going to say, oh, INFPs can't reason. But I know somebody such as Monica, where it's like, it's the subject, it's the FI comes through in the subjectivity of the premises, but then it's how it's reasoned through. Now, a thing from NLP is that you've got a value, and a value is a nominalization. And a lot of times, a nominalization might be something like fairness. And something like fairness can come from a TI place or an FI place. And there's going to be intertwined. And it's like, so you can start with a feeling of what's right and then reason it through. And Jung himself said that ethics is abstractified FI. Now, I would argue there's other things going on in there as well. So I don't like it when someone says that ethics is FI. There's other things coming into that. You can get to the same. It's just that there is more of a tendency for FI to go towards ethics, especially when with NE, where it's coming up with general rules across many situations of what the right thing to do is. FI with NE.
It reminds me of how I've thought a lot about how I don't like when either function definitions or type definitions are describing like the symptoms that a person or function might display, because oftentimes, well, you can even think of, as you were saying, that, what was it, transcontextual, or like NE was the genesis of, you could think of every function as like the genesis of things as opposed to being a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, or other functions coming into play. So I believe Oh, there's a brilliant thing. There's a brilliant thing. But it's a little bit tricky to understand. If people get this book, 8 Keys of Self-Leadership, I have something for you. I have a page for you, Megan, that I think you will find very stimulating. You maybe the page is page 191 in 8 Keys to Self-Leadership, and he gives the example of FI as in saying something like this: if the core of each process is a unique representation system, then we can't say extroverted sensing is about gathering facts or introverted feeling is about holding beliefs, because facts and beliefs are just content, and content can be used in many ways. And so if we've got here, we can fully understand a cognitive process when we understand the representation system at its core. Actions, affects, and attitudes flow naturally from the processes we use because we tend to do what fits with them. So that's a little bit, it's a little bit, because it's one of these things where I can sort of see where he's getting at, but I don't quite agree, but I know where it's, because I don't think that Jungian functions are a representation system, because he's taken the idea from NLP. I think the representation systems fit with the perceiving functions, but I think criteria fit with, do you know about NLP, Megan?
Not much, okay. But I'm following you, but I need to look up more.
Right, okay. So anyway, we'll get in that in future. I'm just going to show you this thing. So I did this quite a while ago, 2015, and I was sort of like given a TI justification of how I see, but it's like this fits with temperament and got the opposites in there. So do you agree with this? So it's like SI is about the past, NI is about the future, SE is about now, NE is about alternatives or a little bit in the future.
I don't know if I agree or disagree.
Fair enough.
I think that you can use any perceiving function to consider any of those, but I do agree with these associations, and I'm curious, you know, your thought process behind it. But like, for example, I don't think that an SI user, like an SJ, is going to, every time they think about the future, have to switch their brain into NI mode. Like, I think that you can like project SI into the future.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. David Mark Kersey wrote something about this. Oh yes, this explains the diff. Yes, I can talk about this. Yes, I'm happy now because this.
I think NG can miss the SE because they're projecting whatever their idea is.
Right. So this has bubbled together over years. So and little bits and different pieces, because I think an INTP resembler gets happy when they think of a way to explain something a little bit better.
Oh, so, interesting. Yeah.
So when we read about NI break, NI vulnerable in socionics, it makes it look like ESFJ and ESTJ don't know what the hell they're doing when they're planning into the future. And it's like, hang on a minute, they do plan. So how does this plan? So I asked Elena, what is it like for you? And she says that, well, she plans 6 months in advance, but if something goes wrong, she doesn't know what to do. Now, and then I read something on a Kersey website about INTJ. And if you think about tandem use, you've got NI with SE. And I like to put adaptability in the SE blocks. So, well, if you've got NI with SE, then if something goes wrong, you can adapt your means to the same end.
That's why in fact, I only plan the end. I don't plan the steps because things will go wrong. And I plan where I'm going.
Right.
Like, it's so funny because my mom is an ESFJ and I'm kind of like in the process of building a business, and like I'm thinking through like my intentions, and like for me, what works for me is priorities. I come up with a list of priorities, and as long as I'm working every day, I don't care if I have like this sort of, I guess, process in place by February. Like, it seems like SJs will have like a business plan, or like even like I don't know, they plan like things that I never in a million years would even think to consider. Like, I have like high level priorities that I'm just going down the list of.
Do you have So we could say we can put process in. I think process is a confluence of like SI with TE stroke SE, and then
reminds me of the fact something I've noticed about TI users though is that I will use words that you will have like maybe a different definition of or whatever, and I'm like kind of sloppy with my word choice. Like maybe process wasn't even the best word.
Well, I mean, I can sometimes be like that as well, because like to say it properly would take about a paragraph.
Yeah.
So even though, so you don't like doing the SI thing, or what we put in the SI bucket that's not really SI but gets put in that bucket. But would you use metrics to see sort of like signposts, metrics to see how you're progressing towards the goal? So maybe so you've not got the process in mind, but like a way to think about how close you're getting towards the goal.
Yeah.
A way to measure your path.
So for example, every week I look at my YouTube analytics just to see if there's anything crazy that happened. Like I don't really like look too deeply into it, but I can sort of see the difference.
I'm almost offended. The NE is flattered, the FI is insulted. Right. Right. Right, because I remember you saying it's best to wind up. But I've got one of these other things to show you. Something that I was gonna. It might be good for you to have you join. Was it this thing? I think it was this thing. Oh yes, this is one of my things about get your definitions to line up with the Kersey intellect, and this is what the Kersey Bowen's ones do. So not the Kersey Bowen's, the Nardi Bowen's definitions. Mm-hmm. So we can say that the Nardi Bowen's definitions line up with the Kersey intellects and line up with, let me show you something quickly.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense.
But this is from the book People Patterns, and this explains the intellects quite well.
Logistics is kind of the word I was thinking of, is that I won't plan the logistics. Like, that's probably a better word than process.
Yeah, because it's almost like with TE, where there's different kinds of TE, and it's just like there's different kinds of process. So there might be an emotional process that you might follow. I'm not sure.
I even would resonate with the word strategic. I mean, I think of strategic differently than an NT would probably.
Yeah, but that's gonna. Kersey's got that as. Kersey's got NFs as furthest away from the tactical, but that's the kind of tactical expediency. Okay, so the sort of thing Donald Trump does with the line and being two-faced and like going back on promises and not having any integrity, that kind of expedient action is going to be difficult for NFs.
Like for example, I do content and digital marketing strategy, which is strategizing, but it's more about how can I make people care? How can I communicate the value of your business, sort of thing. So that's strategy, but it's still about values.
Yes. And Kersey wrote, and his son wrote, people can develop this through development.
True.
But the interesting thing is, do you agree that these things are empirically there?
Yeah.
Right. And so when and Shalina told me that she thinks that Kersey is consistent with Jung. And she's read Jung and von Franz and Van der Hoop. Right. So
the way people get it tripped up though is if they get caught on one word that Jung said compared to Kersey. And it's like I really just think they're getting caught on the symptom or whatever. Like, I can't remember how you described it earlier, but like the thing that something uses or does, if they get caught too much in that, that's where it can trip them up. Because, like, for example, let's say I didn't know my type and I was told that I was very strategic in my marketing job or something. And then I was to look at that and I would say, well, I've been told that I'm strategic. So I relate to rational. Sorry. So it's like if you get too stuck on the word.
I'm sorry, but this is funny. Right. Okay. Thank you, Shalina. Yes. Right. I'm sorry for the interruption, but yes.
No, I was just saying, like, that's what I think kind of the issue is, and you kind of have to read everything that you're reading and trying to get the essence of it, and then compare the essence to the other things, in my opinion.
So one of the things is that, so what I'm sort of saying is, if you have your definitions, folks, where, okay, you can have a structural logic point of view. What I'm going to do is I'm going to separate structural logic from TI. I'm going to say that TI uses structural logic, but TI is not structural logic. I'm splitting things up. I'm splitting hairs. Because there's not any because it's about the subjective factor. But so what I'm sort of saying here is we can have a structural logic approach to defining functions where we go, I like Dario Nardi's term. So SE is about now, immersing yourself in the present context. And if you're really immersed in the present context, then you're going to affect the present context. So maybe a little bit of power sensing coming in there, because you're about now and affecting now. And if you've got tandem NI, it's about affecting the now to get towards the next step, and tactical. Yeah. You're still trying to affect the present moment to get to the next step. So, and then you can then say any trans-contextual thinking. Oh, so now you've got like a direct opposite. This context versus thinking across contexts. Nice and opposite.
For example, like I've been working on like digital marketing services, and like 3 months ago, I was like, okay, here are my priorities. Like every week or so, or like every week I like look into my priorities, but then I'm not that great at knowing how long things are going to take. I don't know, like, am I going to get done with this am I going to go from point A to B in a month or 2 months? Like, I'm not really great at that. And so, for example, I kind of realized that, oh, the timing of this isn't what I thought. And so I had to, like last month, I like quit 3 of my freelancers, quit a job, and then now I'm in another job. And I was able to swing that change in a week. Like I literally, like I got this job within a week, and then I quit within a week. And it's like I had this intuition of like, wait, this isn't working. This isn't going according to plan. I need to change something because this is about to go off the deep end. And so that's, I guess, an example of how I use SE. I realized, like, wait a minute, what I expected is not happening as soon as I expected. And so I'm going to need to change something in order to get there. So, like, the overall vision is still there, but the logistics are completely different. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense in terms of tactics. I'm just trying to split it into my mind, because you get these, because sometimes SE and TE very connected together, because I looked at Carl Jung for SE and he mentioned facts. Okay. And then you've got TE, which is like thinking based on the facts and then returns to the facts.
Yeah.
So you can have a situation where because you know how frequently in MBTI people will mess up SE and TE.
Yeah. And I would probably say that I think that SE is facts more than TE, but a lot of times when people are talking about facts, when they're using that word, what they're really talking about is TE. But in my definition of the word, I think it fits best with SE. But there are a lot of times when people are using the word fact when they're really saying like that they want you to explain like your logic.
One of the things, so for example, OP will describe SE as gathering facts. And I would say, dig deeper. To what end? To what end are they gathering facts? So if we think about SPs, to what end are they gathering facts? Well, an ESTP is gathering facts, an ISTP is gathering facts in order to tactically move ahead. They're not just gathering facts at random. Oh, I'm going to gather all these facts that I'm not interested in. They're going to gather facts that is random to the task at hand. And their task at hand is usually tactical. So
you would probably just argue that it's either for FI or TI purpose.
yeah, and people are gonna, and a good line from Chris Howard when he said that, and he was doing it was a series of NLP. In fact, I could send it to you, Megan. It's a series of NLP. It's like a course, an audio course. And he said, your reality is what you focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminded me of something that was written in a Jungian book. And it was just a funny story that I don't know if we've got time to go through. Have we got 3 minutes?
Yeah, probably got to go, but
Right, okay, we'll do that in future, folks. You're going to have to. But yeah, it's not just gathering facts. Otherwise, SE DOMs would be the pub quiz champions. It's to what end they are gathering facts. So yes,
I totally get why. Like, okay, like as an NJ as well, I get why they said that. Because, like, for example, I used to be a journalist, and I would spend so much time on like what's the angle and the purpose of this story, but I didn't do as much with the SE of gathering, which could also just be interacting with the external world, like what sort of facts are already out there, like that sort of thing.
I will lead off with this. I'll finish with this thing by Linda Barons. So it's talking about artisans again. So she wrote this, and I think she's. I think I'm closest to her thinking of all the typologists because she integrates Kersian functions. Given the organizing principles of the temperament pattern of needs, values, and talents, we like to use the following explanation to link Jung's theory with the 4 temperaments. The 8 cognitive processes described by Jung are used to meet the needs and promote the values of the temperament pattern. Certain of these processes suit the pattern so well that the preference for these processes match the preferences indicated by the 4-letter MBTI codes as follows. Artisan SP. Artisans can meet their need for impact and freedom best through the process of extroverted sensing. This process keeps them tuned into the needs of the moment. And so what I'm saying is the kind of facts they're interested in are going to pertain to the moment, because frequently SE DOMs are not interested in history classes. SJs are.
She used the word impact because I've come up with that on my own as one of, I guess, the core needs of SE, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like wanting to impact.
So just a few more, just 1 more minute, folks, before we wind up. This process keeps them tuned into the needs of the moment, and they can readily take tactical actions and seize opportunities. How else would you recognize an opportunity? Thus, all artisans have S and P in their codes. Directing artisans have STMP in their codes, and informing artisans have SF and P in their codes. So yeah, it's the kind of data that they're sensitive to. So the kind of data you're sensitive to, Megan, is going to be in the realm of, it's going to have an emphasis towards how is this idea landing on the other person, rather than. Well, I think for NTPs, there's going to be a part of them that's thinking, how do I express this idea best? And there's going to be a tendency to use the other person as a sounding board for the idea, rather than. So, you know, it's difference with maturity and emphasis and things like that. So this is just a test event, folks, but it ended up being almost a proper interview in itself.
One thing, though, I want to say is that someone asked if you were like an NTP or an ENTP, or that you sound like an ENTP.
Yeah, go on.
I just wanted to say that it's so funny to me because I see why maybe you can seem like that because you're enthusiastic. But in my perspective, looking at you, there's so many times I can tell that you're reacting to yourself or like to your thoughts. And like it still seems like introverted to me because I can just see how strong your TI is more than your NE, because it's like I'm here, but it's like you are entertaining yourself. You know what I mean? Like, not that I don't want to make you feel like you weren't responding to me, but like I feel like you definitely just entertain yourself probably all day. Like,
well, I can partly blame ADHD on that, but I was concentrating. That's one of the. Yes,
I can just see the TI building on itself. Like, even though like you're enthusiastic about it, ENPs are a lot, I don't know, they just come off differently to me.
What tends to happen is if I know I've got a long time to get through stuff, then I listen more to the other person rather than thinking, oh, but this and this and this. So that's one of the things that happens.
On the spot.
Yeah, and also because I was too many things to go through. Like Carol did something funny recently.
Mm-hmm.
She said, she only did. I thought that we were going to cover all the functions in a communication event. Mm-hmm. And she said, no, Ben, we're just going to do TE and TI because I know this group. It's like she planned half of it to be like tangenting. And the first half would be going through her slides and then for us to do our anecdotes and tangenting. Right, so folks, I should have mentioned what the point of this is. So Megan and I, we've got all this stuff out the way, and then when we do this thing on Friday on Megan's channel, it's going to be properly focused around Victor's questions, and we're going to get a proper diagnosis from Victor. And then I should have mentioned this right at the start and then we're going to do an event with Dario Nardi probably in January.
Yeah, actually, if you want to message me this info, you can share with everyone here too, but I want to know, like, if you can remind me of, like, what the events are and, like, the dates.
I think I've invited you to my Google Calendar. It's a little bit weird. It says that if someone isn't using Google Calendar, they can't see it. I'll try to invite.
I'll message you about it. But, okay, so the event Friday, what is the purpose of it? Like, because I know we've had lots of different ideas. And so what is, like, the purpose of it so that I can also tell my people on my channel?
Right, okay. The purpose of the event on Friday is for Victor Gulenko to diagnose your type from the video. And I think you said that you've got some transcription software. And so when Victor's got the video and the transcript, he then, because this is his diagnostic method.
Will he be there Friday, or is this just a video?
It's just me and you and Jonathan, because we can have some little follow-up questions around Victor's 4 main questions. And the idea that why we're not telling you what they are first is so you get a live reaction, yes, because it's a big part of Victor's diagnostic system. And so originally we were gonna, and you very kindly let me give your EEG results to Victor, because this way, folks, and the EEG data doesn't really have Dario's definitions of the functions in. It's got the activities and the results, and so Victor can interpret them in his own system.
Yeah.
And then we can go through that in January. It's probably going to be on a Sunday, a Saturday or Sunday, probably a Sunday in January. It might be about 10 a.m. your time, because it's usually about that time, CST.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I have yet to even go through the EEG report and mix them with Dario's definitions and stuff. Like, I've only read the report that has like general descriptions.
Yeah. And so that's going to be great, because then we're going to get 2 people looking at and looking at the same data, and then we're going to have Victor's spin on your type, and that'll be just a fantastic discussion and an example there of what is wrong with looking at something from different points of view. If that makes me a pan-Jungian, then I will take that as a badge of honor. Right then.
So really, I guess, just to clarify, on Friday, it's going to be, I'm hosting you and Jonathan on my channel, so that you can interview me with these 4 diagnostic questions, and then maybe we'll just, like, chat on the end, like, some tangents in the end.
Yeah, and also, because I think it'd be good for your audience because they're really good questions that they'll be interested in. It's like, they're simple, but brilliant, these questions. They're like so obvious that you might think, I'm going to use these myself. They're just very good, because they're not leading questions.
Yeah.
And I've got to watch that in how I follow up.
A very good point is that I've noticed that there are some people that do typing services where some of their questions are leading questions, to where if you have read about the types and you know what's what, then you know what the purpose of the question is, which is a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway,
So
I can.
that, right. So folks, if we stop recording now, I can have a little thing with Meghan off air for about a couple of minutes because I know she's going to rush off, because there's a few other plans that we have bubbling away in the background.
Yes.
So, is it all right if I stop the broadcast now, Meghan?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.